The night in old Europe did not belong to men. It never had. It was territory of shadows, of bones buried beneath churches and crumbling castles, of howls slicing through the black forests like cold blades in the air. In the heart of Alsace, where the woods closed in like labyrinths of twisted trees and the wind sounded like ancient voices, I walked alone, carrying on my shoulders the weight of the night and of a history written in flames. The ground was soaked with rain and blood. The muddy roads clung to my boots, and with every step I could smell iron, as if the very earth had absorbed centuries of executions. In the distance, the glow of bonfires could be seen. Not festive fires, but funeral pyres, raising flames toward the sky like accusing fingers. Men and women burned on them not for crimes of the flesh, but for crimes of imagination. The cathedral bell tolled in solemn intervals, and each chime seemed to announce not faith, but sentence. I was a stranger there, but strangers were not welcome in villages marked by fear. The villagers' stares were sharp, full of suspicion, as if each face hid the certainty that the devil walked among them. Their voices whispered prayers in Latin, and their hurried steps moved away from the streets as I passed. I saw doors hastily shutting, windows being locked with makeshift wooden crosses, children being pulled indoors by their mothers, as if my mere shadow were an omen of misfortune. The atmosphere was dense, suffocating. The smoke from the fires mingled with the fog descending from the hills, and together they formed a gray shroud that hovered over the village like a burial veil. The air tasted of ash. With each breath, it felt as if I were inhaling the last words of the condemned, the confessions torn from them under torture, the prayers murmured in vain. In the central square, a pyre still burned. The flames danced over a pile of bones and charred wood. The screams had already ceased, but the smell of burnt flesh clung to the night, seeping into hair, into clothes, into the very soul. And even in silence, it seemed as though the fire still cried out, demanding more victims, like an insatiable deity. I walked among the uneven stones of the street, and that's when I saw the markings. On the wall of the tavern, someone had drawn symbols with charcoal: circles, crescent moons, claws. On the doors of the houses, iron nails and dried rue branches were pinned as protection against the beast. The witch hunters called it the loup-garou, the man who turned into a wolf under the light of the moon. For the people, there was no doubt. Creatures walked among them, devouring children, spreading plagues, poisoning crops. But I knew the truth was even more terrifying. Fear did not need proof. A scar on the face was enough, a different look, a word spoken at the wrong time. It was enough to be a foreigner, to walk alone, to prefer night over day. And then, the fire would be lit. I could feel the same invisible judgment on my skin. At every corner, I imagined footsteps behind me. In every shadow cast by the trembling torchlight, I saw reflections of hidden presences. It was as if the village itself breathed, as if it had eyes, and those eyes were fixed on me. In that moment, I understood I was not walking among free men, but among prisoners of their own twisted faith. The village was a cage. The fog, the fires, the bells, the suspicious stares, everything was a bar, everything was a chain. There was no refuge. And as I crossed the square, where warm ashes and fragments of charred bones still remained, I realized I wasn't merely a traveler. I was a witness. I was part of a story that repeated itself, like an eternal cycle of blood and fear. And when the moon rose behind the cathedral tower, round and pale like an accusing eye, I felt a chill run down my spine. The wind carried with it a distant sound, something between a human scream and a beast's howl. And in that instant I understood. The night was just beginning. They say that man creates the monsters he fears. I, however, have learned that monsters have always existed. They were merely waiting for the right moment for men to give them a name, a face, and a sentence. My story did not begin there, in the smoke-covered squares and the blood-stained courts of the Inquisition. It was born long before, when I was still just a boy running through the woods of the Black Forest, on the border between villages that no longer exist. It was there that I first heard the sound that would mark my eternity. The prolonged, deep howl, as if the entire night breathed through it. I did not understand it, but something inside me responded. I grew up under the weight of a curse I never asked for. Some say it runs through the blood, a condemned ancestor, a forgotten pact, a bite beneath the moon. Others say it is the night itself choosing its servants. I never knew for sure. I only felt that something was wrong with me from a very early age. A strange hunger, a restlessness under the skin, a fascination with the moonlight that was not natural. But men do not need proof to believe in monsters. In those times, all it took was a failed harvest, a child gone missing in the woods, a sudden illness, and soon the finger of accusation would rise. It was the werewolf, they would say, as if the word alone were enough to justify the fire. The medieval courts were not searching for justice, they were searching for spectacle. Men and women were torn from their homes, dragged into damp stone chambers where truth was shaped by pain. I saw simple peasants confess unspeakable horrors just to make the torture stop. I transformed under the moon and devoured children. I ran through the forests with my skin covered in fur, drinking the blood of lambs and of men. And the inquisitors smiled, for they now had the proof they wanted. I saw an old man named Thies in Livonia groan as he declared he fought alongside the devil himself, transformed into a wolf to spread plagues across the fields. I saw women in Poligny, chained, admit to having eaten human flesh. But I knew, we all knew, they were just words torn out by pain. Words shaped by burning iron, by the breaking wheel, by the crushing weight of stones upon their chests. And so the myth grew. Each confession fed the belief. Each execution made the people believe even more. Fear was a disease, and the cure was fire. Anne Rice once wrote that monsters are born of solitude, of hearts that find no rest. I would say that, in those centuries, monsters were born of collective hysteria. And even so, there was something true behind the myth, because while many died unjustly, I remained alive, hiding within my body the secret that confirmed their suspicions. The curse is simple and cruel. There are no rational explanations to support it. When the moon grows full, I feel its weight upon my flesh. My bones ache, as if they want to escape the prison of my skin. My veins burn, my heart beats like a war drum. The taste of iron floods my mouth, and my teeth throb, seeking room to stretch into fangs. With each cycle, my body shatters and is reborn in claws, fur, and howls. It is a metamorphosis of pain. Each bone breaks to make room for the beast. Each muscle stretches until it tears. The mind, at times, tries to resist, but sooner or later, the instinct wins. And when instinct rules, there is no morality, no memory, no mercy. Only hunger. I tried to resist. I spent nights locked inside caves, chained to the ground, praying that the body would not give in. But the moon is inexorable. It calls, it demands, it commands. And there is no iron, no stone, no prayer that can stop it. This was the curse I carried as I watched the world around me burn in the flames. I, who was the true monster, survived because I knew how to hide in the shadows, while innocents burned for crimes they never committed. That is the cruel irony of history. The courts hunted werewolves, but never found the real ones. They only created martyrs, feeding a legend that in silence I myself embodied. And that is why I say, the trials did not exterminate the beast. They only multiplied it in the imagination, giving it more power, more breath. Because fear is the most precious nourishment for a monster, and in that era, there was fear to spare. I carry the memory of every scream, of every forced confession, of every desperate gaze before the flames. Not as a distant spectator, but as part of the same night. Because even if I tried to keep away, even if I only wished to exist in silence, there was always something that reminded me I was different. I was the living proof that the curse was not just a myth, and maybe, just maybe, that is why I still walk. Because the story needs to be told. Because the weight of the curse is not mine alone. It belongs to all of humanity. I heard the dogs before I saw the torches, a chorus of hoarse, rhythmic barks, slicing through the silence like blades soaked in resin. Then came the footsteps, many, pounding against the uneven cobblestones, and the metallic creak of chains dragging along, as if the village itself wanted to leash the night by the neck. The church bell struck 3 times, not a scheduled hour for prayer, but a code, the call for the hunt. And I, who carried the moon carved into my body like an invisible needle, knew that night would not let me leave in peace. The fog rolled down from the hills, thick, dirty, embracing the wooden and stone houses, softening the outlines like cold fingers caressing a wound. It was a mist that did not cool. It suffocated. Within it, the hunters' figures grew and shrank, shadows multiplying as if the haze birthed soldiers with every breath of wind. The smell of blood, dry on the posts, fresh on the ground, mingled with the stench of burning tallow from the torches, and my throat burned with a taste of iron that wasn't entirely mine, but which memory recognized. The square opened up before me like a toothless mouth. The last scraps of the pyre were still smoking, and for a moment, I thought of hiding beneath the scorched boards, blending my scent with the ashes. But dogs aren't satisfied with shadows. They sniff out guilt. They lick fear wherever it drips. I turned left into an alley I barely knew, walls so tight the men's torches painted the ceiling in charcoal. And, like a church rat, I slipped behind the blacksmith shop, where steel traps hung like winter ornaments. I climbed a short stairway, jumped over a crumbled wall, and landed in the yard of an abandoned house. I heard a shout. "There," another answered. "Cut through the cemetery." The cemetery, yes. It never offers refuge, only time. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, and the skulls embedded in the masonry seemed to turn their gaze, disapproving of my hurried steps among the gravestones. The wet grass up to my knees clung to my skin. A sharp cold rose from the ground and bit at my spine. When I reached out to steady myself on a larger tomb, I felt the stone, damp, covered in lichen, and the inscription nearly faded away. Names no one remembered, but that death kept under guard. There are nights when the moon offers no light, I thought, not knowing from whom I was stealing the phrase. There are nights when the moon accuses. I listened to the world like someone who submerges their head into a basin. The sounds distorted, the barking turned to hammers, the voices into whirlwinds, the arrows licking the air with the hiss of wasps. I bent low, descended behind the ossuary, and found the grate that led into the catacombs. Rust, padlock, mud. I shoved my fingers through the gap, pulled until the flesh tore in splinters, and the blade of pain cleared my senses. The weight of the night shifted, left my shoulders, and settled in my gut. I groaned low, not out of fear, but from a throbbing pain that came from within, announcing a tide. Bones remembering another shape. tendons aching to stretch, teeth too heavy for a human mouth. Not yet. Not yet. I gave up on the grate. If I went down, I'd be cornered like so many others found there, crucifix wedged between their teeth, condemned to bite their own faith. Instead, I cut along the edge of the wall, sat on the ledge, and jumped out of the cemetery, landing in a backyard of soaked herbs. The scent of aconite stung my nostrils. The lady of the house had nailed bunches of the plant to the doorframes. Protection against what I was, against what I could become in minutes. I left a trail of blood on the threshold and moved on, because blood guides men the way bells guide prayers. The village twisted before me. The alleys folded in on themselves, repeated corners, invented corridors that ended in blind walls. The labyrinth wasn't on a map. It was inside the mind of the one who runs. I entered the barrel cooperative, slipped between empty casks that smelled of sad wine, and backed away at the flicker of sparks. Someone lit a torch on the other side. The bark came loud, very close, and then the dry sound of a bow being drawn. The first bolt passed to my right and bit into the barrel. The second slashed my forearm, opened the skin, and the hot jet that spurted out made the air heavier. The smell of blood thickened, and with it came a creaking in my bones, like old wood about to split. I ran, not with the elegance of hunters, but with the urgency of the hunted. The river gave me shelter for a moment. I leapt in, waist deep, the cold clamping my flesh like tongs. I submerged to avoid shining under the moonlight. The current carried some of my trail, washed away my footprints, confused the dogs. When I emerged, it was by the mill, and the dark blades turned slowly, dragging a wail that merged with my own. I climbed the muddy bank, slipped, and then the world opened into swamps, bogs that swallow boots, puddles that reflect a trembling silver face back to the sky. The swamps choose no side. They trap hunter and prey with equal indifference. The moon appeared whole when the fog tore open for a moment. It was a pale, cold coin someone had forgotten to retrieve from the ceiling of the world. And its light, not blessed, not maternal, struck my face and traveled down to my bones, calling them. My body answered with what I already feared. The throbbing pain climbed my spine, drew lines of fire behind my eyes, pushed my teeth against the gums with an animal impatience. I clung to a twisted willow and whispered, as if begging for a truce. Not yet. Give me enough distance. Give me shadow, not the howl. The voices resumed their chorus. Close the circle. From the east, and the glow of torches swept across the swamp, rising and dying with each sway. I distinguished figures, hoods, crossbows strapped to chests, broad-tipped spears meant to split ribs, men with leather masks, not to hide from the beast, but from the stench of meat and fear. One carried an iron snare, a collar with inward teeth, designed for a wolf's throat, not a man's. Another, the shorter one, had a bag of salt slung at his side, to seal the demon's wounds. I, who knew the rules better than they did, knew. The salt wouldn't burn me, but the faith with which they'd throw it would hurt like a spear. I lowered my body, advanced through the darkness the mist offered, and for an instant I felt the world forget me. Nothing but the heart inside my ribs, the cold on my skin, the weight of the night pressing down on the back of my neck, and the swamp water climbing my calves. I remembered what an old scribe once whispered in the Inquisitor's chamber. Man needs stories to explain the hunger of the heavens. Maybe I was the story that village needed, the scarecrow that justified cruelty. It didn't matter if they caught me whole or in pieces. The pyre would be lit, the crowd would sing, and by morning, someone would swear they saw wolf tracks among the ashes. The barking stopped suddenly. In its place, a stretched silence, so solid one could lean their body against it and rest. That's how it is when the prey disappears from the map. Men suspend the air, hang their breath on an invisible nail, and wait for the wood to creak. The first to break the silence pact was the swamp. A gas bubble rose and popped with an obscene plop. One of the hunters laughed nervously. Another cursed the saints and the water. That laugh saved me, because it showed me where they were, and because that's how courage unravels. First a chuckle, then a shiver, and finally, a misstep. I took the step, not forward, but down. Let myself fall into a corridor of mud, dove in up to my chest, and crawling like one being born, I reached an island of reeds. There, at last, I stopped. Breathing again felt like a luxury. My throat scratched, my lungs were 2 bags of ice. The moon saw me and knew of me. The body, surrendered to the summons, began its sawmill work. Bones scraping bones, ligaments burning, flesh shifting like a beast under skin. The first spasm bent me. The second, I had to bite my own hand not to howl. They heard it. Heavy footsteps resumed their dance. Torches approached in a hesitant semicircle. A shout. I smelled blood. Then there was no escaping the cruel math. Men, weapons, faith on one side. On the other, me, still man by a thread, but already beast enough for my soul to flinch at the nearness of teeth. I thought, in a flash of reason, of going back to the cemetery, scaling the wall, blending in with the dead. But the dead protect no one. They only observe. And I needed something the dead don't give. Speed. The transformation knocked on my chest with 3 sharp knocks and entered without asking. A crack in the shoulders, bones breaking to make room for an older mechanism, and the skin shivered from the inside, as if 1,000 needles were trying to escape all at once. The cold left the surface and rooted itself at my core, where hunger lives. The nails scraped the ground, not like nails, but like claws trying to remember the alphabet of the earth. And still, I resisted 1 second more. A second I bought with all the scraps of humanity left in me. My mother's face resting against mine, the smell of burnt bread on a Sunday morning, the laughter of a woman whose name I no longer recall. Small fires against the winter. That second was everything. I rose, slipped along the edge of the reeds, and, in a flash of silence, crossed the open flank of the hunters. Torches became blurs. Spears bit at nothing. The iron snare snapped at the wind. One man fell into the swamp under the weight of his own haste and didn't return. And none of his companions bothered to look for him, because the prey they wanted wasn't friendship. It was the story they'd tell later. I ran to solid ground. Ahead, the edge of the forest. Behind, the village, the burning square, the cemetery that waits, the catacombs that sigh. Between 2 pines, I heard another sound. Not man, not dog. A howl. Not like the ones imagination invents and legends repeat, but a real howl, full of saliva and ancient pain. A howl that asks neither forgiveness nor permission. I stopped, not by choice, but because the body obeys certain voices as if they were laws. And in that instant, I realized the hunt chasing me through the alleys was not made of flesh and faith alone. There was something in the woods calling me by the name I never use, a beast that speaks my same language of bones. Between me and it, only the night, and the weight of all that would still be broken. The howl didn't stop. It stretched out, echoing between the trunks as if the entire forest had lungs. It wasn't the call of a dog, nor the warning of hunters. It was far too ancient, filled with syllables the human ear can't understand. But the flesh does. The sound made my ribs vibrate, and for a moment I felt my skeleton respond with another wail, trapped inside me. The woods opened before my eyes like a corridor of thorns. The pine trees leaned over me, casting shadows that looked like suspended claws. The wind went silent. Not even the owls dared to break that funeral hush. I knew it was close. The air gave it away. A heavy, rancid smell. A mix of wet fur, fresh blood, and rotting leaves. The scent of something that lives between worlds. Then I saw it. First, 2 red dots, like coals freshly blown. Then the larger form took shape. Arched spine, massive shoulders, arms too long to belong to any man. Moonlight hit the black fur, which gleamed like wet glass. When it stepped forward, the earth groaned beneath its weight, and the swamp water stirred in small ripples, revealing the gravity of its presence. The face was no longer a face. Not anymore. The jaw jutted out, long, filled with fangs that would never fit inside a human mouth. The eyes, sunken and blazing, held a strange intelligence. Not blind like that of a pure animal, but aware, accusing. The body was an imperfect fusion of man and wolf. Legs ending in paws, but still recalling human joints. Hands that bore claws, but hadn't forgotten the gesture of grasping. It was as if the Creator had stopped halfway through the work, leaving that being caught between 2 realms, doomed to belong to neither. The hunters behind me saw it too. I heard their silence shatter into screams and frantic prayers. "Hail Mary! By the blood of Christ! It's him! The loup-garou!" Fear made some retreat, but the more fanatical raised their spears. And it was that movement that woke the creature. It didn't hesitate. In one leap, it crossed the span of 3 bodies, landing among them with a thud that shook the ground. The first man was torn from shoulder to groin, a dry, brutal slash that scattered entrails into the water. Another tried to run, but was caught by the paw, which struck his neck. The sound of the bone snapping rang louder than any prayer. The third had his torch ripped from his hand and shoved down his throat. I watched, paralyzed, not just by the horror, but by the strange sensation of recognition. Each crack of bone, each ripped scream, each howl that accompanied the massacre echoed in me like a mirror. It was as if the creature were my external reflection, an extension of what my flesh was hiding. I knew. That thing tearing men apart in front of me was the complete form of what I myself would become under the moon. Blood flowed through the swamp, staining the water dark red. The smell was almost sweet, metallic, irresistible. My throat burned with thirst. My nails, or claws, scraped against the tree I leaned on, eager to extend. And when the creature raised its head and locked those blazing eyes on me, I understood there was no more difference between hunter and prey. I wasn't there by accident. I had been summoned. It approached. Each step was slow, heavy, like a sentence. Its breath came in bursts of vapor, each exhale hotter than the last. And when it stopped in front of me, so close I could smell the stench of rotting flesh between its teeth, I heard a voice inside my mind. It wasn't a human word, but I understood. "You are mine." In that moment, the few surviving hunters backed up to the edge of the forest, but they didn't run. Terror made them stay, like petrified witnesses of a black mass. One of them whispered, trembling, "There were two of them." And his murmur fell over me like a curse revealed. The beast raised its muzzle to the sky and howled again. The sound tore through my insides, and I felt my body respond. The bones began to give way. The throbbing pain I had tried to hold back now exploded from the inside out. My legs trembled, my hands tore the skin from my knees as they hit the ground. I knew the transformation would take me right there, in front of it, in front of them, in front of the world. And for the first time, I realized that the hunt wasn't just men against the monster. it was also the hunt of one monster against another. The creature said, "You are mine," without moving its lips, and the sentence entered me like a cold blade. The moon weighed on my skin. Each ray was a nail. I tried to step back, but the swamp sucked at my heel, trapping me in a muddy embrace. Then came the first crack, discreet, almost intimate. A phalanx giving way, remembering another form. Then another, in the wrists, the shoulders, like an invisible mill grinding down the man to release the beast. The throbbing pain shot down my spine and burst into my skull. My vision trembled, wires of light slashing through the night, and the taste of iron filled my mouth. I bit my tongue, not to scream, but the scream was already coming from somewhere else, older than the first stories told around fire. The monster is only a mirror, I remember reading on a forbidden page, and in that moment I understood. The mirror does not reflect the face, it reflects the hunger. My skin boiled. There's no word strong enough. It's a wet burning, a fire without flame, as if every pore opened to expel the human and receive the fur. My hands twisted, fingers lengthened, nails widened in the tear that announces the claws. The knees became new hinges, the hips rotated, and breath stopped obeying the count of men. When the teeth grew, pushing against gum and memory, I no longer thought in names. I only felt the weight of the night settling inside me like a king upon his throne. The other beast advanced, certain it would claim me while I was still breaking. That's when the moon entered my blood entirely. A roar climbed up through my lungs. Not human, not wolf, something in between. And I leapt. The first clash was a thunder of bone against bone, ribs grinding, shoulder blades snapping, and the forest returned. The sound multiplied. We rolled across the soaked ground, carving trenches through mud and dead leaves. The fog rose in spirals like a choir applauding us. Its claws came in a cross, fast, aiming for my neck. I dodged with the clumsy grace of someone born from a mistake and bit into its forearm. The blood burst hot, salty, a black wine that woke me even more. It howled, struck me with its free paw, and hurled me into a tree. The world went dark for a moment. Just the jingling of bells back in the village, reminding me that faith enjoys counting the blows. I sprang up. The new body is a machine, born knowing the manual. I pressed my side to the willow, took in its damp scent, and moved in a low arc, slicing through reeds. Pretending to yield, I drew it into terrain that served me. Twisted roots, treacherous water, muck that doesn't release those who misstep. When it lunged, heavy, its paw sank to the shin, and that moment of imbalance is enough in a fight of teeth. I climbed its chest like scaling a cliff, drove my claws into its collarbone, and bit into its throat. I felt the cartilage give beneath my fangs. The howl that exploded into my face carried the scent of its life. But it was ancient. It spun its body, used its own weight to throw me. I landed among stones and felt something give in my side. A deep, slicing jab that gleamed like ice inside my flesh. The pain came late, like a messenger lost in the cemetery, arriving after the fact. But it came. I tried to brace my paw and saw the world tilt. My right rib cracked, slicing the air with the music of broken things. It was in that interval that the men returned, stirred by the noise. Torches flickered through the shadows, spears trembled in hands, and I saw the reflection of flames in their faces. Fear, yes, but also that joy, born only when the story confirms the belief. One raised something shining, the tip of a spear silvered like a chalice on an altar. I heard the metal sing through the air before I felt the cut. The blade passed along my back, opening a groove that spilled liquid fire. It wasn't pure silver. but faith enough to burn me. I staggered, and the other beast took advantage. It came low, grabbed my tendon, pulled, and the world became a drum of pain. I swallowed the howl. There was still enough man in me to understand. If I fell there, I'd become a blind man's tale at a market, a bad poem nailed to a tavern wall, the monster that bled like a pig. And there was another truth, more intimate. If I fell, what killed me wouldn't be the spear or the claw. It would be shame. So I let the inner beast open the gates. I didn't pray. You don't pray to what already answers. I exhaled until my chest became a cavern, pressed my forehead to the cold ground, and pulled the world inside me. The scent of blood became a map. The sound of footsteps became a rhythm. The fog became a cloak, and I rose larger. Not taller, but in will. What was still human in me, in that moment, chose to live. I charged. The first man snapped like a dry branch. His spear flew from his hands and landed in another century. The second tried a prayer, but the words collided with my claw. The third ran, slipped in the muck, and vanished with a corking sound. I didn't want them. Not then. They were noise, distraction, shadows feeding off flames. I leapt over them and returned to what mattered, the other half of my fate. He came, chest open, fangs bared, certain I'd retreat before the shine of scars telling tales of old wars. I lowered my head, took the blow in my good shoulder, and let him pass just far enough. Weight is both enemy and ally. I turned, used his own mass against him, and saw him roll with a roar that smelled like ground-up bone. Before he could rise, I drove the men's spear, that improvised silvered tip made from holy metal, between his ribs. It wasn't deep enough to kill, but enough to change the sound of his howl, from rage to wounded fury, which is always more dangerous. He caught me with a blind strike, tore open my chest from top to bottom, and the air rushed in cold like winter water. The cold on my skin became cold inside. I felt my legs give, my vision stutter with lights. For a moment, nothing existed but the taste of metal, the buzzing in my ear, the bell someone rang inside my skull. That was the edge. The end often feels like snow. That's when I heard, not with ears, but with what I still call a soul, the voice that had brought me into the world. Not, "You are mine," but "You are." A verb without a complement, a gesture that points, but doesn't explain. And it was enough. The weight of the night stopped being a burden and became an armor. I felt every broken bone realign under the beast's law. I felt every fissure seal with the brutal glue of necessity. With a blow that was neither elegant nor noble, but was true, I grabbed the creature's neck and pinned it to the soaked ground, shoving its face into the mud. The swamp accepted the offering with a satisfied gurgle. It thrashed, claws tracing constellations across my back. I endured, because hunger held up my spine. Its free paw found my belly, tore, pulled. My hand? Hand? Paw? Found the fallen spear again, and this time I pushed it in until I heard the sound that separates the world of the living from the world that watches. Its howl rose, too loud, loud enough to wake even those already beneath the cemetery stones. And then, silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that hangs like a ceiling about to collapse. I stepped back once, twice, blood dripping, breath like a forge. The creature trembled, turned its head, bared its teeth in a gesture that wasn't quite a smile. In the depths of its eyes, there was something I understood too late. It wasn't only hatred, it was recognition. As if it saw me from the other side of a river we both wished to cross. Then, darkness took it. Behind us, the village hovered between fleeing and kneeling, Some wept, others made the sign of the cross, and some looked at me the way one selects firewood for a new pyre. I stared back, not with defiance, but with that strange melancholy that descends when the moon begins to wane. I felt my body ask for earth, shadow, time. I felt the promise of a dawn that would return my form and demand the price. I staggered to the edge of the forest. Each step was a bead in a rosary of pain. Behind me, the swamp's waters began to breathe again, as if nothing had happened. Ahead, the pines opened the corridor into the darkness that remains for those who survive. I looked one last time at the fallen creature and understood that if this was victory, it came late and costly. I was wounded, nearly destroyed, and it was that devastation that taught me. The beast I fought was not the only one. It was merely the first to dare speak my name aloud. The moon lowered a finger. The night held its breath, and I, dragging the body still burning in the cold fire of metamorphosis, knew the end would not wait for me. It would reach me, in the forest, or in the church, in the water, or in the ashes. And when it came, I would have to answer, not with teeth, but with the truth that men fear more than any howl. Because the hunt, now, has chosen me as the hunter. And every pyre lit in my wake only lights the path for the one who comes next. The silence that followed the creature's fall wasn't relief. It was a loaded pause, dense, like the moment between lightning and thunder. The swamp bubbled in its own tongue, swallowing blood and mud, while behind me the survivors, men, only men, stepped back with glassy eyes, unsure whether to call me a monster or a miracle. The torches still trembled in sweaty hands, and the cathedral bells in the distance rang as if they were celebrating not victory, but the death that insists on repeating itself. The fallen creature was gasping. Its chest rose and fell in a rhythm with no future left. The howl caught in its throat was more groan than scream, and in the reflection of its eyes, I saw myself, wounded, exhausted, condemned to exist with no place in the world. There was no triumph there, only recognition between two broken mirrors. I reached out, claw, paw, deformed limb, and for a moment I thought about sparing it, letting it return to the forest that had made it. But the night does not forgive the indecisive. One final spasm crossed its body, and darkness took it for good. The wind blew over us like a priest closing mass, and in that gust, I understood. The hunt was not over. The monster before me was only a chapter, a face in the mirror. Others would come. Worse, more ancient, perhaps closer than men would dare admit. Behind me, the villagers began to whisper. Words that always come before the fire. Demon. Cursed. Beast. I felt their stares sharpening like blades. There was no gratitude, no absolution. To them, it made no difference who killed whom. The mere fact that I existed was already a crime. And when a woman raised her finger and shouted, "Loup-garou," I knew that the pyre, sooner or later, would be lit for me as well. I stepped away slowly, each step carrying the weight of an eternity. The body still burned. The throbbing pain in my ribs reminded me that part of me was fragile flesh, but another part, deeper, larger, no longer obeyed human laws. I entered the forest like one passing through a veil. The fog closed behind me, muffling the shouts, swallowing the sound of the torches. There, alone among pines and shadows, I let myself fall to my knees. The moon still shone, round, relentless, like a witness that never sleeps. I felt the blood run warm, and I mixed it with the mud using my fingertips. It was a silent pact, a reminder that I belonged neither to the living nor to the dead. I was what remains when fear takes on flesh. And then I understood. The medieval trials never hunted monsters. They created them. Every confession torn out under torture, every body burned in a public square, every prayer spit against the wind. All of it fed the beast until the universe itself accepted the lie as truth. I was the living proof of that pact. I walked deeper, listening to howls multiplying in the distant hills. They weren't echoes of mine. They were others. Voices calling me, waiting. Maybe brothers. Maybe enemies. Maybe just the inevitable chorus of a curse that never walks alone. Dawn would come soon, and with it, weakness. Flesh would return to being flesh. Bones would settle back into place, and the memory of the beast would retreat beneath the skin, waiting for the next moon. But I knew the village would not forget. They would hunt me again. And it wouldn't be just them. History always finds new hunters. I raised my face to the moon and let the cold slice the air inside me. There was melancholy, yes, but there was also a strange calm, because unlike them, I knew the truth. The monster isn't only in the forest. It lives in every judging stare, in every pointing finger, in every fire lit to purify what is not understood. I am the proof. I am the curse. And as long as there are men afraid of the night, there will always be a werewolf watching.